Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snider. We are broadcasting live from the beautiful Dillon State Park here in East Central Ohio. I'd like to remind all of you to please press the follow button, and you'll be notified 1 hour prior to the start of each show. Our guest this evening is James Horak. James's website is emvsinfo.blogspot.com, and he has some very unusual and important knowledge in the following areas: extraterrestrial life, giant electromagnetic vehicles operating in our solar system, highly advanced previous civilizations that are operating on the Earth called original terrestrials, unified consciousness, and the secret world government. And I'd like to welcome James Horak back to the show. Hi, James. How are you this evening?
Fine, Mark. And you?
I'm doing great. And how are things in Texas?
It's been very nice these last couple of days, especially today. No chemtrails today.
You know, chemtrails are a subject that I have been a little more involved in lately. Do you have any thoughts about the origins of chemtrails for our listeners?
I think the technology began with the seeding of clouds, or the idea of the perversion began with making snow for the ski lodges in Colorado, and they were using compounds of mercury, and which is very toxic, of course, and the absenteeism of school children up Leadville and Crested Butte, Steamboat Springs, and so forth was very high, but that didn't matter, did it? And so you've got the same mindset doing what they're doing today. There's nothing good about it. I think the binary weapon potential of it that has been discussed as early as 2007 is true. It has a effect on our immune systems, and so there's nothing good about it. Shouldn't be done.
Well, we could do a whole show on that. I don't want to get us too far off our topics for this evening. There is a physicist today named Nassim Haramein, and he talks about these massive objects that are coming in and out of our sun, and he states that these objects may be intergalactic ships. And James, I know you have talked about an advanced race called the Drouge that departed Mars, becoming inhabitants of stars, some our sun. And there's a lot of possible questions that I could ask here. First, I'd like to ask, what is the true nature of our sun and other stars that would allow a race of beings to live within them?
You can't suppose what is accomplishable in technology that is directed by considerations beyond grasping, greed, maniacal control of others. In our own time, we could have solved all the problems of this planet had we the values and priorities that really matter.
So, are you saying that if the elite hadn't taken control on our planet, and that we would work together, we could even have technology that would allow us to live within a star?
No, but you'd be going to star systems. You would have accomplished a relationship with a more extended community, and you'd have the benefit thereof, and it goes beyond imagination. What you see and what I spoke about with the Drouge is rare. It's the people that have decided that they wanted to retain the collective that they had as a culture right into spiritual immortality. It's accomplishable, but only to a very high level of development, one that has moved beyond technology into spiritual technology. And that is something that very few cultures, civilizations, ETs even dream of.
Did the Drouge build the great monuments on Mars like what are talked about in Cydonia with the giant?
No. Our ancestors built them.
When our ancestors lived on Mars, were they taller? Did they breathe a different kind of atmosphere than us?
They were about the same in most respects. They were, of course, did not have the exact respirant gases that they were used to. We have a viable range. We have, here on Earth, we have too much oxygen as a respirant, and that causes oxidation, reduction, and more rapid loss of cells. So that's not our best, or what was once our native respirant. And we have a substance called helium, which is wrongly classified as an element, but it buffers. It's a wonderful buffer. You can live breathing only helium. Helium gives you, because of the ability to reuse it and the ability that it can perform everything that you need for the body, and without oxidation reduction. So your life expectancy doubles.
So the oxygen in our atmosphere has caused us to age more quickly. Our direct ancestors built the structures that were on Mars. Did at some point our ancestors then move here to Earth? And I suspect that they had something to do with the construction of the pyramids then at Egypt?
Oh, yes. Yes, they did. And the pyramids are an interesting topic, and people are fascinated by them. I say this in almost a cryptic way, but there are pyramids and there are pyramids. It's just like you have a lucid dream, and you can tell that dream from ordinary dreams that are just nothing but biofeedback. Mm-hmm. There are pyramids that have energy signatures, and it's the location of this pyramid that's most significant.
The location of the Great Pyramid at Giza is at the center of the planet. Is that correct?
No. But it is one of 5 sites where there is a integrated formation of control for the engines that were put on this planet to maintain a orbital parity of the Earth with the Moon, because the Moon has an inconstant mass. The Moon is too large for this planet. And the changes that have to be made as far as adjustments create an inconstant gravity wave for both and prevent the Earth from being able to hold helium. And that's why helium is not a composite in our atmosphere and part of the respirant gas, and it is to our detriment.
James, I'm going to ask you a question, and feel free to not answer this if you don't feel comfortable. How did you learn this information? This is absolutely fascinating.
I say that I had I've always been different, and I had a unifying experience in the summer of 1975 in Utah. There is an EMV operation there, and I just happened to find myself there one morning, about 2:30 in the morning. I was resting. I was going out to some claims on the Little Dolores River in Utah, and I had come back from Grand Junction with supplies. There were some other people down on the claims, and about 2:30 in the morning, I was just exhausted, and I pulled up on this ridge of a ridge canyon, and as I raised the back of my little 510 Datsun up to get in, I gazed down at this canyon and saw these lights. And so there was a steady stream of them that was ringing this tower rock to my right, and then coming back up and going back behind these canyon walls out of sight. And they were about the size of most UFOs that people see. But they were in a steady stream. You could see as many as 22 or 23 of them at a time. So I proceeded down, and I got about half the distance, which I would say was probably less than 100 yards. And several of them came out of formation and formed a perfect V over my head. It didn't frighten me or anything, but it was I responded to it almost unconsciously, went back to my 510, got in the bag, lay down, went to sleep. And in the morning, all I had to do was think about something, and then just things started putting everything together. And I knew before that day was over that I had been associated with these EMVs for an exceedingly long time. What was in them had an emotional, a language that I had with them, and it was compelling. At first it just took all my energy, and then it started giving me energy, and it was something that I can't think of even today about that day, and that the days that ensued for about a week after that without it being emotional to me.
What kind of emotions did you feel? Is it something that's just literally overwhelming?
It can be, but of course, after a while, you control it, and it's a form of communication, and it's a yearning. I've been gone a long time, and that yearning for me to return, and the emotion with it. It's not something that it's easy to explain because it's not. There are no words for it. There are things that come into my mind like visions and what I can see in other places that I'm supposed to deal with.
You know what came to my mind, and this may be inappropriate, but what came to my mind is kind of that close bond that we have with our pets. Is that way off?
I wouldn't say so, because I've had close bonds with pets, and I can communicate with them the same way other people can. We don't account a lot of credibility to people when they talk about their pets, because we think they're a little soapy, or they're putting too much. They're interpreting it in a way that's putting too much attribute to the pet, or whatever. But I don't think that's true. I think that animals communicate with us. I think if you're consistent, the same is true with a young child. If you're consistent, the communication begins with the first part of the relationship, and it does with animals. With cats, you have to be very consistent. With dogs, dogs are more forgiving. They are far more trusting, and they just will slobber all over you, of course. So, but cats are reserved. Cats are watching everything you do, trying to read your intent. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a sign of intelligence.
That's quite interesting. What came to my mind while you were saying that was the idea that in a profound way we're all one. Is that relationship, that oneness, part of the emotional response you had with the EMVs?
With the EMVs and what's in them?
Okay, I see. Okay, let's step back a little bit. Can you tell us a little more about the Drouge?
They were a very elegant civilization and culture, and their workings, their machines, are still there on Mars, below the surface. Tesla accessed them. Perhaps people that were associated with Al Bielek and the Montauk Project, perhaps they did. There were claims that they did. That they actually had some interface with those machines and were given designs. One of them was to build this chair. And what's very interesting about the claims of the projection chair was that there was a movie, one of the best science fiction movies of that decade, that came out. It was called Forbidden Planet, and it is almost a parallel with what the people that were part of the Montauk Project, when Bielek and a couple of other people that were still associated with him. I hear he's dead now. What they claimed they underwent, and this particular chair, which could magnify the ego into a monster, or the id, as they defined it.
How is it that these EMVs can be so close to our sun without being destroyed? Is it possible that the energy from our sun requires an atmosphere to really produce heat?
It doesn't require an atmosphere. It produces an atmosphere. Any contained or held gas, which is bonded by a magnetic field, is atmosphere. So the sun has an atmosphere, but it also has an extremely high heat. If you have enough energy, you can accomplish being in proximity to anything of the same energy, frequency, or intensity. And the EMVs have the capacity to be 18 EMVs could absorb all the energy of one star.
One of the pictures that flashes up during the show, the radio show here, is a photograph from the SOHO satellite that shows 10 objects that appear in front of the sun. And James, I think the Aztec, the Hopis, and the Navajo called these large objects around our sun the plumed or the feathered serpent. Is that correct?
Romantics, weren't they?
Yes, indeed.
Well, let me just give you a tale. I'll spin you a yarn. Supposing that a mythic gentleman by the name of Quetzalcoatl had come before them and given them laws, codes, and in order to satisfy questions that were posed to him, he said, at a certain time or whatever, I will show you what something in the sun, which he may have even termed his home. And he said, and it will resemble a serpent, or it will resemble some other mythic legend that they had at the time. So he kept his, like the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, he kept his word. And his prediction came to pass, and it had an impact. And therefore, they listened a little more intently to his information and to his teaching of what kind of standard, what kind of code of conduct that they should comply with toward each other.
Was Quetzalcoatl, was he Christ?
No. He was similar to a Christ figure, I guess. And but he was from elsewhere. There's little doubt of that. But he was humanoid and carried with him the technology he needed to serve his task.
So, do these EMVs keep our sun in check and stop it from creating flares that can destroy the Earth?
They form the energy. By that I mean F-A-R-M, not F-O-R-M. Without them, any planet in as close a proximity to our star as Earth would have all life extinguished every 17 years on a mathematical probability. Because one CME can hit the Earth and denude it of all life, and then in a couple of weeks, the rest of the planet's gone. And that's the potential. Without this, the presence of the EMVs, we would not have reached any level of culture. We'd have no lineage. So they are, but that's not all they are. They design systems. They keep them in check. And as of the last few years, even ET has come into the picture to help, because there have been some developments in our solar system that required a little more engineering than usual. One of those is that the gathering of matter from the asteroid belt and the work on Jupiter to make it an amenable planet for life, so that the people on Jupiter's moons could have a planet, that has caused extra problems, because the asteroids from the asteroid belt have come in and started being a problem, and that's what you saw hitting the sun. Those were under intelligent control, but they weren't craft. Why would a craft crash into the sun?
Who are the people that are on Jupiter's moons?
Well, they're humanoid, and they've been there a long time. And if you look all the moons that, if you look at them, that you can see forms under their ice. They're covered with ice. Mm-hmm. And you can see forms under there. And if you look very closely, those forms certainly resemble buildings.
Do you know anything about the races that are living on these moons? I've heard, I think that there are giant oceans that are under the ice. Is that true?
True, yes. Yeah. Well, they're advanced. We've had concurrently, we've had different races here among us on Earth. There are some in the Earth, and there's one in Antarctica. And these are, I wouldn't say, the one in Antarctica is what you could call a race. Those underneath the surface of the Earth are a different species. Those on the moons of Jupiter are different species. And then there's Venus, where they're both different species and different races.
Oh, okay. Now, you've opened up a whole lot of information there. So when you say that the people on I say people, maybe that's not even correct, the people that are on the moons of Jupiter are a different species. Are they humanoid? Do they have 2 legs and 2 arms?
Yes, almost all sentient life is bipedal, and they're people. If you were to be confronted by one, it wouldn't be frightening to you. I mean, if you were, you had a high level of ethnocentricity, perhaps, but our religious institutions, when they were going through their fanatic stage, don't like people that are different and get rid of them.
Tell us a little bit about the people on Venus. There's a lot of information, especially with the old contactee information. There's a book I really like called Stranger at the Pentagon that talks about a man named Val Thor that supposed to spend a couple years at the Pentagon, and I think he lived underneath the surface of Venus, according to the book. Can you tell us anything about these people on Venus?
If you ever get a chance, a friend of mine, Kevin Smith, did an excellent ebook on Venus. And when you start looking at the images that he shows in that book, which are, of course, NASA images, when you start looking in them, you will see so many things that will defy any other description other than bases. And I know that you have seen and heard about these critters that are around astronauts in space that look like, they look like a big fried egg with a blue yolk. And they're all over Venus. And they're big. They're very big. So what are they? I mean, they're not a sentient species, but they're an organism that is useful for terraforming. They produce oxygen. They're good guys. But, yeah, I don't think you'd want to go dancing with one.
Wow, that's amazing. There's a whole other show we could do there. Let's get back to the EMVs. I've heard you call these EMVs biological machines that are capable of emotion. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. Superb emotion. They're wonderful. The people that are in them have an affinity with them that I don't have. It goes beyond what I have. And I've envied it for a very long time.
James, did God create these EMVs?
Well, you bring up a wonderful question, and let me say this. I've been around a long time. I am an agent of something that I am no closer to the face of than you or anyone else. I believe in a design, and that is what is God to me. I believe that there's something behind a design and an order. Nature is what some people call it, that is beyond, you can't conceive. It's like asking me, when did everything get started, or how far is space, or what are the confines of a galaxy, or, these questions have no answer. And when you think that you have the answer, you're going to have the box knocked out from under you.
So do these EMVs hold souls, and would they be similar to what we might call heaven?
Well, that's I think that it goes vastly beyond what people talk about heaven. I had a grandmother who was a fundamentalist, and to her, heaven was streets of gold and a crown that you wore, and there'd be so many stars in the crown and everything. And that's not the kind of heaven I would think I would be in wonder or awe of. But what's in the EMVs, I am. And you have access to everything. Knowledge, the best of wisdom, and what's going on everywhere simultaneously. No time. There's time has no meaning. It's wonderful.
So, in these EMVs, when you say you have access to wisdom, I get the sense that what you're saying is not only do you have access to the wisdom, but also the actual experience. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, yes. People shed the travail. They don't carry it with them. In fact, you begin losing that after death, when your soul and your mind come together, forming spirit. And it's a more forward-looking thing than remorseful, sad, or fearful experience. Once you're relieved, if you've ever held the hand of someone as they died, you share, and you know that you can feel the spirit leaving. Mm-hmm. And it's a resignation. The mortal self resigns. It is like a prayer. If you know how to pray, you utter your wish or your hope, and then resign to whatever there is that has heard it to answer it. And that is what passing is. And I don't like to talk about it because there are people that say, "Oh, I can't wait." Well, you are betraying your purpose if you don't wait. I know that there are people that are in situations and pain and agony and so forth, and that's another thing. If it's more than you can bear. And I don't think anybody has a right to condemn someone because they resort to suicide. But at the same token, it's a form of self-betrayal.
When you describe death, it sounds to me like you're remembering.
Oh, I've had the pain of death. I've had the pain of death. I've had every experience that a mortal can have. It's the only just way that I could be wise with respect to mortals.
Let's switch back to the EMVs. I want to talk about Dr. Norman Bergrun a little bit. He's an alumni of the Ames Research Laboratory, and as far as I know, he was the first guy to talk about these EMVs being found in the rings of Saturn. How are these objects, these EMVs, interacting with the planet Saturn?
The significant discernment that Dr. Norman Bergrun was able to make about the EMVs up until he began studying images, because he was an imagist. And he began studying these images. All these astrophysicists and astronomers and colleagues of Dr. Bergrun, all of them believed that these were, quote, wandering moons of Saturn. And that defied the definition of what a moon is. A moon has constant orbit. And so it was a dodge. It was a clever dodge so that they didn't have to admit they had no idea what these were. He began to see a conforming pattern. Two expressly that were at the terminus of the A ring, in fact, at both termini of the A ring. And as time went on, as he began to write his book about what he was finding out by examining these images under a microscope of all things, he began to realize that they were completing the A ring. And before he published his book, the A ring had been completed. That was enough evidence for him to draw some conjectures and back them up. And he did it. And his book is based on going from there to showing patterns on planets and moons, which indicate what he thought had been the presence of EMVs when they attached to the moon, when they attached to a planet. But I went a little further when I was in touch with Dr. Bergrun and talked to him a few times. Mostly I dealt with a colleague of his, an associate by the name of Casey Dawkins. Lovely lady. And I went so far, I was a little bold, and I went so far as to suggest what they were doing, what laying out these rings consisted of, and then in intention. What was the purpose? What was the point? And of course, that began to draw his concern over me, because he's a scientist and he deals in cold hard facts and observations. And suddenly I'm saying something that to him I have no grounds to be saying. So he started getting very alarmed over me at that point, and I can understand why. But I had a reason for taking the risk, because I wanted to introduce a concept that I knew he would eventually confront, and that was their presence in the sun and what they were doing there. So what I wanted to do was to show him that their presence was beneficial. There was no threat. There was no hostility, and that was my point in doing that.
So these EMVs, they're huge. I mean, I think they're machines, biological machines, that are anti-gravitic. They produce electromagnetic fields. They're capable of warping space-time. And they're building the rings around the monster planets like Saturn and Uranus. Is that correct?
Well, around Saturn. Now there are rings that they create, but Saturn is special. There's something unique to the rings that they're building around Saturn. Those rings are matter from two planets. They're composed of matter from two planets.
Can you elaborate on that any more?
Earth and Mars.
Matter from Earth is contained in the rings of Saturn?
Yes. Rock, of course, is processed, and it's laid out in these rings to be exposed to cosmic bombardment. It's further reduced, and when it reaches a point where it's efficacious to any living tissue, it's taken back where it came from.
It comes back to Earth.
Yes.
And the purpose of that is to somehow help the Earth?
Without it, no planet can begin life.
Is there currently a civilization living underneath the surface of Mars?
No.
Does the U.S. have people stationed underneath the surface of Mars?
No. They have had bases on Mars, but they're gone now. There are ETs on Mars. There are ETs on the moon. We had bases on the moon. They are gone now.
Are the ETs on Mars and the moon, are they studying us?
They've always been there. They're curious, yes, because they know what the situation here is, and although they're pessimistic in the course of the last few years, they are decidedly concerned and want man to succeed here and get over the bump and become something elegant, something that can join them.
The Earth is then kind of a petri dish, is that correct?
It has been now. It has been. That wasn't the intention of anyone, but it just came about. Situation. Of course, because it is a unique situation, and all the known parts, because it is so unique, it is studied. And the people that came to Colares, Brazil back in the 70s were from outside the extent of the extended community here, and that's why they spent so much time scanning the villagers of Colares and trying to study them, and I believe these were the same people that showed up in other places too. And what they were doing is a thorough study, because the situation and the people here are unique. Never seen any sentient life before with split consciousness.
Well, that leads into my next question. You've talked about problems with the Earth's gravity wave that led to the story in the Bible that's called the Tower of Babel. Can you tell us?
Yes. I think you wonder how legends and myths start. In almost every one, there is a seed of history. And in this case, that's what we have here.
And you've talked about this whole idea of split consciousness that we have, and it's because of the uneven gravity waves here on Earth?
That has plays a large part in it. There was some disassociation, mass disassociation, that began on Mars, and was one of the reasons why they began to tame the Earth so that it would be a suitable planet again.
So we've seen successive civilizations that have risen and fallen on the Earth. Were they all subject to this split consciousness?
Well, in this lineage, by what I'm talking about, your ancestors, after they came to this system, this is the 7th cycle, and all of them have failed. There was one that an elegant race survived, but they were small, and they were just an element of a broader civilization that didn't. And that's what we call the blondes. Now, they are situated in other places, but they've maintained a base here on Earth, and they've had a constant presence, and military intelligence at the highest levels knows all about them. And the area where they are is in Antarctica is a no-fly zone today. So they're not disturbed.
So the Earth is kind of a school where souls get the opportunity to reach a certain level of maturity, at which point then what happens? You say they join the greater community. Can you describe that a little more?
Well, every soul upon death joins with the mind, and it will eventually migrate to a star. And when it does, it will absorb energy from that star. And usually there is an EMV in the vicinity, and it will eventually go into the EMV. And once it's there, it probably won't want to ever leave, but it has that option. I know that when I've spoken about this before, there have been people that were alarmed that this was a confinement. It isn't.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and you can tell me if some of this sounds off base to you or whatnot. I found it very interesting. Some of the work that you have done reminds me very much of the information that physicist Nassim Haramein discusses. And Nassim talks about our sun being a singularity or a gate that connects other stars. He talks about ET ships being able to use these stars for travel. And I have another book that I read, and I've had the guy on the show before, and the book is by a fellow named A.J. Ensor, and the book is called The Human Quantum Leap. And it mentions the same kind of thing. It says the stars and the planets have gravity wells that projects towards something that he calls the point of consolidation. And he says you might consider a tornado as it has a huge top and it consolidates to a small point on the ground. And the top of the tornado is the well that each star and planet sits in. All of these gravity wells, he says, A.J. Ensor, intersect with every other gravity well in the universe, and that these gravity wells are a kind of highway that these ships drive through. And Nassim Haramein says that the Egyptians said that the sun gods helped them build the pyramids, and Nassim states that these beings, the sun gods, use the sun as a kind of a gateway for travel with their ships. And I remember that you came forth on the Kevin Smith show to talk about these large images of these, I guess, the EMVs that were near the sun. Does any of the information that Nassim Haramein or A.J. Ensor that they're talking about, does any of that resonate with you?
Certainly. And I'd like to add something else. That although our civilization here does not conform to any idea of reality projection, we can be as creative with our imagination as we can with any other aspect of creativity.
Well, you left that one wide open for me.
Well, I think that there is profound beauty in the way that people individualize what they perceive as possibility.
Uh-huh.
And one of the astounding things, the only reason that the Petri dish here hasn't been cleaned up is that it is evident to ET that finally that there's something going on here that's astounding. And there are qualities and intensities in the people here with their split consciousness that at one time was felt like psychosis or dangerous or whatever, but that there is so many wonderful things about it, so many amazing things. But sometimes when you have people that have accomplished what they need to accomplish to establish themselves, get over the hump. There's no war. There's no illness. Everyone lives, their full expected lifetime, and there are all sorts of things that aren't even conceived here, that are taken for granted even. There's certain complacency, and you don't realize what the beauty that can come about with and the kind of creativity that can be generated by this conflict of split consciousness that, of course, looks appalling. If you come from a unified mind comfort zone, I mean, you look like savages. But then when one realizes that the excellent people that overcome this and then go on to commit themselves to art, to forms of beauty that have depth that E.T. is amazed about. And I talk about an experience I had with an E.T. one time. He was riding my rear end, and I said, "Read this." And I shoved the book in his proximity, and he said, "All right." So he read it. The next time we talked, he said, "They did this?" I said, "Yeah. Yeah." And the book was Moby Dick. And it moved him tremendously.
So what you're saying, I think, is that the uneven gravity wave that's produced our split consciousness, in order for us to survive, we've had to generate our own kind of coping mechanisms, which has produced a tremendous creativity here on Earth, and that the watchers, the observers of our civilization, have now stepped back and said, wow, there is something incredible going on here.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, that's fascinating. James, it's been a classic show. I've just enjoyed every minute of it. And I want to let everyone know that we're speaking with James Horak, and his website is emvsinfo.blogspot.com. Is there any closing remarks you'd like to leave with our audience, James?
I know that there are people with evil designs that want to use the hostile alien thesis to add more chains on the individual and to exact more sacrifice and more permission for them to erect a greater and greater police state worldwide. Don't fall for it. There is no hostile ET presence. What's confused the issue is the presence of EVs. EVs are not sentient. They are flesh-made robotoids, and with a computer terminal, and that's it. And they are being used by evil humans to confuse the issue and to give a false impression of a hostile ET threat.
Very well said, James. James, it's been absolutely fascinating as always, and I want to thank you again, sir. Have a good evening.